we're starting on chapter 5 tonight. Jesus demonstrates his authority. Verse 1 starts out, they went across the lake to the region of Gerasenes. Now, he was back on that other side, and it, talked about those over there, and then he was getting away from them again, so he came back. Before, they were wanting to go across the, and the storms come up and everything. Now, this is after that, and he's coming back across the lake. So he went to the east side of the lake. They call it Gerasenes. There's another place that calls it Gadara, I think it is. It's about the same. It's an area and a town. Sometimes people look at you funny. You run to Oklahoma City. Where are you going to Oklahoma City? Or Oklahoma City, Oklahoma County, or Oklahoma, or there's several. So we don't know exactly where this was. But it says, when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often had been chained hand and foot. But he tore through the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Now we see this back in Luke. We also see this in Matthew. Okay, they both reported there were two men. So it could be that there was this guy was the stronger, and like I said, Luke wasn't we don't know that he was a witness to this. He's getting a report from somebody else and he's writing it down. So that may have been all it was. Let me tell you this story about this guy who was demon possessed, and he told it like that, and that's the way he wrote it down. So Luke tells us he was a long time. He'd been possessed a long time. Luke also tells us that he wore no clothes and lived like an animal, wild animal. He also lived in the caves. Well, the caves were the tombs, all right, where they buried people. If you were a Jew, and we don't know that this guy was or not, the east side of Jordan and the east side of Lake Tiberias is what they call Decapolis, all right? There's 10 cities, 9 cities on that side, one on the west side, but they call that Decapolis. Those were made up of a lot of Gentiles were in that area, and what they have called Hellenized Jews or Romanized Jews. Those that they don't particularly adhere to what the ones in Jerusalem did, the ones on the west side. They're a little bit more lenient. I know in the show, I don't know if you watched, but when the people from the Decapolis come by, they said, "Well, what are you doing? You're wearing linen and wool together. That's you can't do that." And the old guy said, "Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, I'll have to do it." They were both Jews, but that was one of the funny things that they had, that you couldn't mix your fabrics. Okay? Another one of their regulations that they had. But anyway, this man had been tortured for a long time by this demon, and we'll see here in just a minute, it's more than one demon. And it said he cut himself by stones. We've seen that where the people that are demon possessed harm themselves. One of the place, the little boy they said he tried to drown himself. He ran out and tried to drown himself. We also recall the story of Elijah and the priests of Ahab and Jezebel, and they were cutting themselves before their God, trying to bleed and trying to do all this stuff. What did the Bible tell us, the New Testament tell us that Satan was, what is his goal, basically? Steal, kill, and destroy. He wants to steal.
You're destroying yourself.
Right. And that's what he wants to do. He wants to steal us, kill us, or destroy us. Some way or another. We are God's creation. He too is God's creation. And it may be, my opinion, but it may be he got a little upset when God created man. I don't know. But he created man to worship God, and Satan is trying to take that place. That's what got him thrown out. Anyway, this guy was trying to kill himself, not him, but the devil's in him was trying to, okay? So when he came out, he immediately saw Jesus, and Jesus said to the demon, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." Now the demon used his full title, full name, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. Here again, we go back, I think we talked about it when we talked about it in Matthew just a few weeks ago. When they use the proper name, when somebody calls your full name, when your mom would get upset with you, Jerry, Glenn, Epperson, well, you straighten up. Mom, Daryl, Keith, Duval, you know she means business. Whatever it is. And that's kind of what this meant, that they felt like there was a superstition that if you knew somebody's name, you had power over them. Is what they were thinking. And the demons were trying to get what they could on Jesus. And Jesus told them, come out of it. Didn't bother him at all. All right. And he asked him, what do I have to do with you? He was afraid of what was going to happen because he knew, who he was and what his ultimate destination is, and he didn't want to go there right then. It says, do not torment me. These demons considered torment to be put out of this man's body, but they could, in another instance, when a demon possession happened, he said, don't send me to the pit. So that could have very well been thinking of what it was thinking too. Demons have the same goal in Christians as they do everybody else. They attack men because they hate the image of God that's in man, and they attack him by debasing man and making him grotesque, just as this man was, living like an animal. Demons also want to wreck the image of God, but their tactics are restricted towards Christians because demonic spirits were disarmed by Jesus' work on the cross, Colossians 2 and 15. Yet demonic spirits certainly can deceive and intimidate Christians, binding them with fear and unbelief. The other night, you watch those scary movies. I don't watch them anymore, but when I was a kid, you watch some scary movies and something start happening, and in the night, you don't know what's going on. I was asleep, about half asleep, and heard this ding, 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 and one of the Darlow's music boxes kicked off. And I'm like, what in the world is going on with this thing? And it kept on playing, and finally it gave out. Well, about 2 or 3 months ago, little Brooks was playing with them and wound some up, and I guess one of them just took off. Some people would say, well, there's a demon in there trying to do that. No, you can let that get you, get you excited and get you scared. And it did scare me because it woke me up out of a sleep. I thought somebody's in the room, going through our stuff. Keep one of those things over. But that's what we don't have to be afraid of the demons. Now, in ourselves, we are no match. But through God, we are. Through Jesus, we are. Brother Epperson, 9 through 13.
Says, then Jesus asked him, what is your name? My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. And he begged Jesus again and again not to send him out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The Jesus, send us among the pigs and allow us to go into them. He gave him permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. Then the herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned.
Okay. He talked to it. He didn't tell him a name. What he told him is, there's a lot of us here. You know how many people is in a legion, a Roman legion? Up to 6,000. Okay. Now we don't think that there was that many, but a little later, well, it tells us right then.
He said they heard a hog.
2,000, yeah. So if there's one demon for each hog, which you don't know if there is or not, it could have very well been anywhere from 2,000 to 6,000 demons. It's just a lot. Okay, the one had 7 demons. Remember Mary Magdalene had 7 demons cast out of her? Just think if you had that many demons. The guy was so tortured. And it's incredible that he could break steel bonds, or not steel, but iron bonds. So, and I know that had to hurt. You know, you got something around your wrist and you're pulling on it like that, breaking those bonds. That had to have hurt. So he thought he would intimidate Jesus. Didn't tell him his name. But he said, hey, there's a lot of us here, you know, kind of wanting to put him off a little bit. Hopefully that would intimidate him. But that didn't bother Jesus at all. He just, again, he told them to get out. And he told them that, you know, the pigs were over there. Now that was, to me, unique because you are on the eastern side of the Jordan River in this Decapolis. There are more Gentiles there, so there could have been, and they said even could have been some Jewish people that had pigs, that raised them, that sold them to the Gentiles. They may or may not have partaken of them. You know, they're not supposed to eat pork, but they may have or may not have. We don't know. But I guarantee you 2,000 pigs is a lot of pigs. And again, to how many was in, there was over 2,000 pigs. Matthew and Luke don't tell us quite that, you know, how many, but Mark puts that into effect. Now, we don't know if there was how many, but even if, you know, there was a lot of the demons there. And anytime,
You think to yourself, how can one body have that?
well, it's a spirit, and the spirit can occupy, it doesn't occupy matter or space like we think it, you know, would. But whenever you get animals together and they get riled up, horses, anything, cattle, it don't take much to get them stampede. And I think that's what happened here. The devils went into the hogs, may have only been a few dozen. We don't know. But they start riling them up and get them, and all the pigs took off. And they're going to follow them. They're just the way they are.
Do you think, okay, what the Jews thought about pigs, you know, I mean, how they looked at pigs, and then that's what they got run into, in other words, unclean stuff, you know, how they.
Yeah, they waller in the mud, and they're you know, they're very, I don't know if you know this, but they're pretty intelligent animals.
Yeah,
Daniel had 4 different pigs, and yeah, they're smart as whips. You go around and, you know, once he learned after a couple times around the barn what he, you know, traced to get them out and exercise them a little bit, he knew that. And of course you had to keep them under control there for a little bit, but once they knew that, oh, that's good. And they would, Darla went with us she went with us one time down to Oklahoma City during the fair, and the pig got loose, and she was out here like just trying to corral that thing, come right between her legs. And these aren't little pigs. She was riding that baby for a little bit. You got to understand how they are, but they are very intelligent animals. But yeah, being a Jew and being that they're unclean to the Jews, that just made a further impression on them, the demons. They wanted to be somewhere. They didn't want to be cast out into the depths, as one way, or into the pit. They wanted to be inhuman, if possible, so they can create damage. And if not, then they wanted to be in some kind of animal. So it tells them that they begged him to go into, begged him that he would not command them to go out to the abyss. They didn't want to become inactive. So instead, they went into the swine. And said, notice that the demons can't even afflict pigs without permission of God. Since a demon can't enter even into a swine without being sent by God himself, how little is the power or malice of them to be dreaded by those who have God for their portion and protector. We need to understand that. I mean, that's, so many people get upset. Yes, they have a lot of influence, but when God's protecting us, we don't have to fear. And the herd ran violently down into a steep place into the sea, and they all drowned. So that farmer that was there watching that, or shepherd, or whoever it was, he was pretty hacked off. He just lost 2,000 pigs. So hopefully they can learn from this, and if they were Jewish, that, you know, they should have been raising them anyway, according to Jewish tradition. But this is mercy given to them. 14 through 17, Iris.
Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to have their region, to leave their region.
Yeah, they came around. They started hearing about this. Those that the shepherds ran off and told the townspeople. So they came out to see what was going on, and what they saw was a man. That man that they knew was crazy, demon possessed. He's sitting there with Jesus. He was dressed, clothed, and in his right mind. So they were afraid. They couldn't understand what had happened to him, what had taken place. So instead of welcoming Jesus there, they wanted him to leave because to them, he was something they didn't understand and they didn't comprehend. And we see that people are intrigued with him until something starts happening, especially over in the Decapolis in that area. He had a lot of success over there, and some of his disciples did too, but they also didn't want him there. They were afraid that they would, maybe there were more people that had pigs, and they're afraid he's going to run all our pigs into the ocean. That all these things that would come into their head, they don't know what's going on, and that this guy, demon possessed, now he's sitting in his right mind. How in the world could somebody do that? I'm sorry. I'll let that go. We had church, Paul and Robert.
You know what?
Do you think, as we were going through this, most of the countries that are superstitious, and I'm not saying, really
Right.
get into this stuff, okay?
Right.
Are poor nations. The
It is.
people are not, Africa, and again, I don't,
No.
and then Haiti, some of those places, they're poor. That he keeps, when you look at that, the countries that have made the most advancements in the world since Christ are those that have had Judeo-Christian values.
Right. Right.
I mean, look at,
Yeah, it's just one of those things that they're brought up that way, superstitious wise. They're brought up and that's all they know. So there's people over here too now. I mean, even more now, but just one of those things. And that was one of the things that Christ came to try to rectify back then, try to show them that he was the way, that he was the Son of the Father. So he did. He went and departed, okay? Bertha, 18 to 20. Bottom page 6.
As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed.
Okay. He wanted to stay there with Jesus. Not stay there, but wanted to go with Jesus. One of his reasonings may have been, hey, I'm with him, they ain't going to come back. But Jesus, I'm sure, assured him that that's not the case, and it's more likely what Jesus was wanting. You do like his disciples. You go spread the word. What happened to you? What happened? And we see that he did this. He went out and says all the people were amazed. Wherever he was a walking testament to what Jesus did. And he could tell him exactly what had happened before. I don't know how they are, if they can understand when they're demon possessed or whatever, but they knew as long, he'd been possessed a long time. Says that is a striking name for a man, he that had been possessed with the devil. It would stick to him as long as he lived, and it would be a standing sermon wherever he went. He would be asked to tell the story of what he used to be and how the change came about. What a story for any man to tell. It's Charles Spurgeon. So Jesus didn't want him, not that he didn't want him to go with him, but he thought he would be better served there. There are other people over on the other side, and they wouldn't know who he was. They didn't know he would be demon possessed, that he was demon possessed or all that. So where with his own people, that's where he needed to be and be able to reach the most people and understand. So it tells us there on the next page, on page 8, where all the names in the middle of the page, where all the names of the cities that were in the Decapolis. Decapolis means 10 metropolitan areas.
Oh, I heard that a long time ago, but
yeah, metropolis, Superman city.
Oh yeah.
Opolis is a city. Okay.
And maybe we're.
So this is where these 10 cities were near the Jordan River. 9 of them was on the east side, 1 of them was on the west side. One of them still has a lot of remains there. That's Psychothopolis. It'd become interesting to go there. Once you've seen a bunch of bricks, like Darla says, you've seen a bunch of them. Like Daniel says, once you've seen the hole in the ground, you've seen them all.
You've seen them all.
Why do you want to go see that?
It's strange. I would like to go to Damascus because it's one of the very few cities that had its name.
Now this Damascus is on the east side. Damascus, Syria. I think what you're talking about is on north, or Lebanon. I guess that's where it is, somewhere up there. Verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him. Remember, he left that crowd. They stayed around there, evidently. So he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus, or Jairus, or Jairus, or Jar, Gair. I mean, that's a different pronunciation of it. But said, when he saw Jesus, he fell on his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went in with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. Now, in this case, Mark tells us that she was dying. I think Matthew put it into account that she's near death. I mean, it was probably a little closer than what we really. And the ruler of the synagogue, what we think of that, it says may have been like a modern pastor. He managed the spiritual and the business affairs of the synagogue. This man came in desperation to Jesus. It also talks about, in one of the commentators, I don't see it here, that Jairus may have been one of the 23 judges that each synagogue had. Okay, one of the leaders, that's one of the titles they had, a leader. And each one of them in that town, I guess, had 23. That's what it says down. He was a lay official responsible for the supervision of building and arranging the service. So he helped out what the rabbis wanted. This particular one, he had faith that Jesus could heal. So he must have been and seen some of what Jesus had done already. So he told him, he said, if you can come and heal her, he felt that way. This kind of reminds us about the centurion that we talked about that didn't even have to go there. You just speak the word. So it tells us how we are to go. Let's see. Adam Clark noticed 4 things displayed by Jairus that are necessary for answered prayer. We must put ourselves in the presence of Jesus. It tells us that one of the rulers came. We must humble ourselves sincerely before Jesus. He fell at his feet. We must lay open our request with holy earnestness. He begged him earnestly. And we must have total confidence in the power and the goodness of Jesus. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be healed and she will live. So he had a lot of faith. Again. Okay, Brother Everson, 25 through 34.
And there was a woman there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I could just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that the power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering."
Okay. So in the middle of going with Jairus to his home, this happened in the procession. And this, again, somebody else with a faith that is amazing, that she couldn't physically touch him. If she touched him, he would be unclean, because she was unclean. She had been unclean for 12 years. That means she wouldn't be able to go to the temple at all, even into the women's side. Her husband probably divorced her. That's what they think happened if she was married, because she couldn't have children. Okay, so that's what one of the predominant things that they had. She was out on her own. She couldn't go back to her mom and dad because they couldn't take her in because she was unclean. She was basically on her own. So she was out almost like a leper, if you want to say it that way. And she was out on her own. And she went to many doctors, and they just made things worse, evidently. Nothing helped. And she was totally spent all of her, Luke tells us, spent all of her livelihood on physicians. They have said some of it's kind of interesting then, Adam Clark there gives a recipe for some of these things that would help a woman afflicted like this. An old rabbi told her to take gum of Alexandria, of alum, and of Corsus hortensis, the weight of a zuzi each. I don't know what all that is. Let them be bruised together and given in wine to the woman that hath an issue of blood. But if this failed, okay, first of all, it could fail. Then we have another one. And then if that fails, there's another one. Okay? So it's one of those things, it's almost, here again, like we was talking about superstitions, it's almost like that. That this be, maybe that was the best it could be. Could have been, yeah. But she had been to all those, and that none of that had helped her. And all she saw, what she saw as she was following around the crowds, was somebody, Jesus was healing her, and she had enough faith in him. The people had faith in Jesus. All he had to do was touch his garment. That way, he wouldn't be unclean, and she wouldn't be in trouble for getting him unclean. But it's amazing in all these things, what happens to Jesus, Jesus made her clean. He made the leper clean. He touched the leper, but the leprosy didn't come on him. He was the one doing the cleansing, and all of his miracles. It's just amazing that it went totally opposite of what would have happened. So immediately she touched, probably, it says the hem of his garment, as it showed in the Chosen. They had an outer garment on, kind of like a coat, and it had those tassels on it. And it could have been, she just reached out and touched those tassels, is all that she touched. And immediately, she felt it in her body that she was healed. And also immediately, Jesus felt that virtue go out of him, that healing go out of him. And we don't know if every time he healed somebody, if that went out of him. But we know a lot of times that he was really tired when they were finished, that day healing people. Yeah. He would just, So that power that had gone out of him, I'm sure it affected him as a human being. Because it was just physically
Jesus doing miracles, especially in the book of Luke. You know what it makes me think of? Because I know that God, he actually gave me a miracle.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm thinking to myself, not many people don't love miracles, read Luke. But on the other hand, actually in this day and time, he still does miracles. Uh-huh. What makes you wonder, Lord, how did it make you feel when you gave me a miracle?
Uh-huh. It's always open for us. We just, a lot of times, don't accept it. So he looked around, wanted to know, and he knew right away who it was, but he wanted to bring attention to her. Not to discriminate, not to, belittle her, not to embarrass her, but to give a testimony. Who touched me? And she spoke up, fear and trembling, okay? She fell down before him and told him what had happened. So he told her, go in peace and be healed of thy affliction. And she'd already been healed, but again, people want to be there, be close in case it comes back. He's right there. That's That's not what he told her to do. Go out and, go be in peace. And it says your faith has made you well.
I truly don't think, in my case, I know that God did that. I'm like, I don't have to ask twice, because you know, you just, and I don't have to ask you to do it.
That's right.
I mean, you either believe it the first time or you don't.
So she told the truth. Okay. Says we come to him as a great physician, and he asks what seems to be the problem. So don't leave anything out. We must tell him the whole truth about all our suffering. He wants to know where it hurts. We must tell him about the other doctors and the cures that they've tried. And we must tell him about our hopes, because he wants to know what he can do for us. One thing he said in here that's not recorded anywhere else. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Okay? That just encompassed her, gave her such a good feeling that nobody had called her daughter for 12 years. Wife or anything like that. So that just was comfort to him.
But she had a lonely life because she was excavated from everybody.
That's right. Iris, 35 and 36.
When Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe.
That's hard to take. I'm sure he was, okay, hurry up, get over this healing and go get my daughter healed. Because it happened in that way. They were on the way and they got delayed because of this woman. And it took some time. We don't know how long it took, but in between that time, his daughter had died, according to the people. And I'm sure she did. I'm not saying she didn't die. But Jesus is more than death. He conquered death in the end. Okay, so we can have that life. Told her, just believe. Told him, don't be afraid. Just believe. And 37 through 43, first look.
He did not let anyone follow him except Peter and James and John and a brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talahaba, no, which means little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the little girl stood up and began to walk around, and she was 12 years old. At this time, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Okay. A few interesting things. Peter, James, and John. Okay, two brothers, James and John, and then Peter. Andrew was Peter's brother, but he wasn't in there with that group for whatever reason. We don't know. But these three were there, and they were eyewitnesses of it. Now, Matthew heard about it afterwards, and that's why he wrote it down in his. It tells us also that she was 12 years old. It tells us that she's a child, that Talitha Kum, or Kumi, means little girl, say to you, get up. It's telling her that she could arise out of it. Now, we don't know exactly what she died of or anything like that, but Jesus revived her, resuscitated her, okay, from death. And if she was so physically fit, she was hungry. You know, somebody that had been sick and not, you know, feeling very well, they're usually not hungry. They don't want to do anything, so they lay around. She got up, she walked, everything. It was just amazing to the disciples. Again, I think because it was those three reinforcing that in those three. I don't know if they needed it to see it again, you know, a resurrection or see what it was.
Or teaching.
It's something that they needed it. So, but he told them that she was just sleeping. Now, we've heard that phrase a couple of times. We'll hear it again when they talk about Lazarus, that he's asleep. Because to Jesus, that's all it is. It's just asleep. This death is not, it's temporary. And it's something that he, in his crucifixion, went and conquered death. Now, Jairus was a leader, or one of the leaders there at the temple. He probably was fairly rich. They said that they need to have people to wail for them, to cry. They needed a flute player. They needed something else. There's 4 or 5 different things that they said normally a funeral would have. And this was their typical one. And these are the people that laughed at him when Jesus said that she's just asleep.
Well, they were already making funerals.
Oh yeah, they were there. That's why I said that a normal funeral, that was what you had. You had these, they wailed for a certain period of time. Then they went all the way to the grave with them while this wailing.
And they didn't believe he was going to.
No, they didn't have any clue that. So Jesus spoke to her just like she was alive. Okay? And he did it because he is God. Romans 4:7 tells us, says that God gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. That's the hardest thing for us to believe. Call things as they aren't. We keep seeing things the way they are. That's what the people saw, that she was dead, but Jesus saw her alive. Said they were, Jesus didn't fail Jairus. He didn't fail the woman in need of healing, but he ministered to both of them. And he used their faith of Jairus extra. Says, in all this we see the work of Jesus is different, yet the same among each individual. Jesus can touch each need so personally, he can touch ours the same way. It goes and talks about Jairus, how his daughter, 12 years, she had sunshine were extinguished. The woman had 12 years of agony that seemed hopeless to heal. Jairus was an important man, the ruler of the synagogue. The woman was a nobody. We don't even know her name. Jairus was probably wealthy because he's an important man. The woman had spent all she had. She was poor. Jairus came publicly. The woman came secretly. Jairus thought Jesus had to do a lot to heal his daughter. The woman thought all she needed to do was touch his garment. Jesus responded to the woman immediately, but he responded to Jairus after a delay. Jairus' daughter was healed secretly. The woman was healed publicly. Jesus did things in certain ways, and we don't know exactly why he did them. Sometimes he told them, keep quiet, don't tell anybody about this. And other times, everybody saw, so there was no way he could tell them to be quiet, because everybody, all the crowd was seeing the feeding of the 5,000. How in the world are you going to keep 5,000 men, plus women and children, from telling them? We had no food there. We were there for 3 days, and we were getting hungry. He fed us from 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So it's just amazing, you know, what he did, why he did all this, to show them, to try to teach them. So
Really is awesome.
appreciate everybody coming out.
We appreciate the teaching. I have a question for you and Brother Everson. Have either one of you